Elias sat in his cramped cubicle, the flickering fluorescent lights above mimicking the rhythmic pulsing of a headache he couldn't shake. To the world, he was just another data analyst, a man who spent his days drowning in spreadsheets. But behind the screen, Elias was fighting a silent war. Every line of code was a desperate attempt to climb out of the mediocrity that defined his life. His family's ancestral estate was crumbling under the weight of mounting debt. It was more than just a house. It was his last connection to a father who had expected greatness. The pressure was a physical weight, a suffocating presence that made every breath feel like a chore. Heavy silence of the cubicle felt like a predator waiting for him to slip. The monotony was shattered by a sharp chime that didn't belong to any of his standard programs. Elias frowned, reaching for his phone. A notification pulsed on the screen from an app he didn't recognize, an icon that looked like a silver shield against a black background. The program was titled Aegis 7, and he couldn't remember installing it. Curious, he tapped the screen. A video window popped open, but the image was a chaotic mess of static. As the connection stabilized, a face emerged. It was a man sitting in what looked like a damp, makeshift bunker. He was covered in soot, with a jagged scar tracing a path from his left temple. Elias nearly dropped the device when he realized he was looking at himself. This wasn't a deep fake. The subtle asymmetry of his own nose and the way he bit his lip were undeniable. The version of him on the screen looked like he had survived a war that hadn't happened yet. The man leaned closer to the lens, his voice a low whisper that vibrated through Elias's bones. He spoke of a hidden tin box buried under a loose floorboard in the attic of the estate, containing a single blue marble and a letter Elias had written when he was 7. The skepticism that served as his armor shattered instantly, leaving him exposed. "Listen to me," the future Elias urged, his eyes darting to something off-camera as distant explosions echoed. "At 4 o'clock today, your mentor will call you into his office. He is going to offer you a contract for a new surveillance algorithm. He will tell you it's the key to saving the estate. You must not sign it, Elias. It isn't the breakthrough you think it is the beginning of the end. If you sign that paper, you set a clock in motion that no one can stop." The video cut to black, leaving Elias staring at his reflection. The warning was urgent. He looked at the clock. It was 3:20 p.m. He tried to dismiss it as a prank, but the predictions started to materialize. At 3:35 p.m., a courier tripped, spilling coffee exactly as predicted. At 3:50 p.m., his phone rang, an unknown number that stopped after 3 rings. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Each event was a hammer blow against his resolve. He needed that contract to keep the estate from foreclosure. The choice felt impossible. Trust the desperate man in the video or save his family's ancient, crumbling legacy. The clock on the wall ticked toward the hour. At exactly 4:00 p.m., his mentor appeared with a warm smile. They walked to the boardroom, where a stack of papers waited on the polished table. "This is your moment, Elias," his mentor said, handing him a fountain pen. Elias looked at the signature line, the ink representing his family's salvation. He reached for the pen. Just as the nib touched the paper, his phone buzzed with a violent intensity. He stole a glance at the screen. A new message had arrived in frantic text. "They are already watching you. Don't look up." The cold air stung. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, the frantic rhythm threatening to choke him. He stared at the signature line on the heavy bond paper, the black ink beckoning him to trade his soul for the salvation of his family's crumbling estate. "I need a moment. I can't do this right now," he stammered, his voice sounding thin and foreign. The mentor's warm, paternal smile didn't falter, but his eyes shifted instantly, turning into 2 chips of freezing blue ice that seemed to pierce right through Elias's skull. Elias didn't wait for a formal dismissal. He turned on his heel and bolted from the boardroom, the sound of his shoes echoing like frantic gunshots against the sterile marble of the hallway. He bypassed the elevators, fearing the enclosed space, and took the stairs 3 at a time, his breath hitching as the cold air of the stairwell burned his throat. Emerging onto the bustling city street, the world felt fundamentally altered. The familiar urban landscape was no longer a place of commerce. It had transformed into a predatory labyrinth of glass and silent observation. He kept his head down, pulling the hood of his jacket over his hair, trying to make himself small. Every traffic light with its unblinking sensor and every security camera mounted on a storefront felt like a weaponized eye pointed directly at his temple. He was a marked man, a glitch in a system that demanded total conformity. He bypassed his apartment entirely, knowing that the mentor's reach would extend there first, and instead took a series of winding bus routes to the edge of the gritty industrial district. He checked into the Sunset Rest, a grimy, low-tech motel that still utilized physical keys and lacked a centralized computer system. Inside the dim room, which smelled of stale tobacco and harsh cleaner, Elias collapsed against the door, sliding down to the floor as he pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The silver shield icon of the Aegis 7 app flickered to life. A new video file was waiting. This time, the future Elias looked even more haggard, his face a map of exhaustion and regret. If you're seeing this, you didn't sign the contract. Good. But you need to understand that you've just declared war on a god, the gravelly voice croaked from the speaker. The man on the screen let out a hollow, haunting laugh. The mentor was never trying to save the estate, Elias. He was using your family's debt as a gilded leash to keep you obedient. That surveillance algorithm isn't for public safety. It's a predictive control engine, designed to identify and eliminate dissent before it can even manifest as a thought. He calls it progress, but I've seen the world it creates. In my time, he used your code to consolidate global power, triggering a systematic collapse when the algorithm decided that half of the human population was no longer statistically relevant. The screen shifted, displaying a grainy, heartbreaking photo of a small girl with bright, inquisitive eyes. "This is your daughter," future Elias whispered, his voice finally breaking. "In this timeline, she was everything to me. But she was lost in the purges because I was the one who built the back doors into the system. I gave the mentor the keys to the cage, Elias. I traded her future for a pile of stones and a failing estate that was never worth her life. Don't let her story end before it even begins. You have to stop him." If you're finding this timeline as intense as Elias is, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the conclusion of this journey. Fueled by a volatile mixture of cold rage and sheer terror, Elias pulled his laptop from his bag and set it on the scarred wooden desk. He avoided the motel's Wi-Fi, instead deploying a localized bridge he had developed for his private data analysis. Using the encrypted bypass codes his future self had hidden within the video's metadata, he began to slice through the mentor's private firewalls. The data he uncovered was more chilling than any ghost story. Project Aegis wasn't just a business contract, it was a harvest of human behavior. But then he found a red-flagged file that made his blood turn to ice. Containment Protocol 4B. By refusing the signature at 4:00 p.m., Elias had officially been reclassified from a vital asset to a high-priority liability. The system had already tracked his movement patterns. A heavy, deliberate thud sounded at the motel door, followed by the unmistakable metallic click of a master key sliding into the lock. Elias crept toward the door and peered through the tiny, distorted peephole. 3 men in dark tactical gear stood in the shadows of the hallway, their faces obscured by visors. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a final frantic message appearing on the screen. "Don't open the door. Use the ventilation shaft in the bathroom. Move now. I'm sorry about what happens next." Elias scrambled into the narrow, dusty ventilation shaft just as the motel door splintered off its hinges. The sound of heavy tactical boots and muffled, urgent commands echoed through the floorboards below, a violent intrusion into his once quiet life. His phone screen pulsed with a schematics map of the building's infrastructure, a glowing blue lifeline in the suffocating darkness of the vent. He crawled until his nails bled and his knees were raw, guided by the precise, rhythmic vibrations of the device in his pocket. A text flashed across the screen. "Left at the junction. Wait 3 seconds for the fan to cycle. Do not breathe." He obeyed, his heart hammering against the metal ducting like a drum. He eventually dropped into a damp, trash-strewn alleyway 3 blocks away, his lungs burning with the cold night air. As he ducked into the shadows of a subway maintenance tunnel to catch his breath, a final video file materialized on his screen. Future Elias looked hollowed out, his eyes sunken and brimming with a grief that transcended time. Elias, listen to me very carefully. You are approaching the facility, but there is a price I haven't told you about. The man on the screen took a ragged breath. The prototype server is the temporal anchor for this version of reality. If you destroy it, the Mentor's surveillance empire falls, but the cost is absolute. My daughter, your daughter, only exists because of the chain of events this technology set in motion. In a world of peace, she is never born. If you wipe the data, you save the world from a digital cage, but you will never see her face. You will never hear her laugh. You are choosing between a world of order and the only person I have ever truly loved. Elias stared at the grainy image of the little girl with the inquisitive eyes. The weight of billions of lives versus one soul he hadn't even met yet crushed his chest, making it hard to swallow. He realized now that the "I'm sorry" from the previous message wasn't about the physical danger. It was about the impossible burden of this choice. He leaned his head against the cold concrete wall, tears blurring his vision. He could walk away, sign the contract, and ensure she lived, even if it meant a world in chains. But then he looked at the scars on his future self's face and the desperation in his eyes. To live in a world of shadows was no life for a child. He reached the Mentor's facility, a glass and steel monolith that looked like a tomb under the moonlight. Using the encrypted backdoor codes provided by his future self, Elias bypassed the biometric scanners and silent alarms. Every step through the sterile hallways felt like a betrayal of the father he was supposed to become. He reached the server room, a cathedral of humming black towers and pulsing fiber optics. The air was frigid, smelling of sharp ozone and artificial cooling. He pulled out the logic bomb, a portable drive containing a recursive feedback loop designed to melt the silicon brains of the system from the inside out. "I knew you'd come back, Elias," a voice echoed through the vast room. The Mentor stepped from behind a rack of servers, looking disappointed rather than angry. He stood with his hands in his pockets, the image of a patient teacher. "You were my greatest student. Why throw away a global legacy for a ghost story from a phone?" Elias didn't flinch. He remembered a detail from the very first video, a secret the Mentor had buried decades ago to fuel his climb to power. "I'm not here for the legacy, Arthur. I'm here because of Sarah, because of the sister you couldn't save, because the world wasn't ordered enough for you." The Mentor froze, his face turning ashen. That name was a wound that had never healed, a piece of data even his own predictive algorithm couldn't quantify. In that moment of paralyzed guilt, Elias slammed the drive into the primary terminal. The room screamed. A high-pitched digital whine erupted as the servers began to overload, the cooling fans spinning into a frantic blur. On his phone, the video of the little girl began to pixelate and tear, the colors bleeding into gray. "I love you," future Elias whispered, his voice a fading ghost as the image dissolved into static. The messages started deleting themselves, one by one, backward through time, vanishing into the digital void. Elias watched the blue light of the screen fade into a dull, empty blackness. The facility went dark. The hum of the world-ending machine silenced forever. Elias woke up on his own sofa. The sun was streaming through the dusty windows of his modest apartment, and the city outside sounded normal, noisy, chaotic, and beautifully unpredictable. His phone sat on the coffee table silent. There was no Aegis 7 app, no messages from a scarred man in a bunker. A notification popped up. His bank account was overdrawn, and his employer had sent an automated termination notice for his unexplained absence. He was broke, he was unemployed, and the family estate was surely lost to the banks. But as he looked out at the street, he saw people walking without the invisible chains of a predictive God. His phone buzzed one last time. A single text appeared, shimmering with a faint dying light before vanishing into nothingness. "Thank you for being better than I was. Live a life worth living." Elias took a deep breath, the air finally tasting like his own. Our choices aren't just paths through the woods. They are the fire that burns away the shadows of a destiny we never asked for, leaving us with the terrifying, wonderful gift of an unknown tomorrow.